I always loved the vision of this body carried down by a parachute, and the way it's described, where it's like leaning over, and then because of the parachute catches the wind, and the cords are all attached to it, and he's like kind of wrapped up in the cords, it like moves his body around from just like the way the wind is affecting it. And that makes them think it's alive. And I always thought this was such a cool device in this story because it convinces them that the beast is real. But also, like, to me, and especially this time reading it, it is such a tie to the sins of the existing society. Welcome, friends, to episode 380 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss William Golding's 1954 novel, The Lord of the Flies. So, James, we have the conch now. We're allowed to talk. So we can talk about this novel that I feel like a lot of people were assigned to read either in middle school or high school. I believe I was in middle school, I want to say, for me, later on in middle school. So it's been many years. It's definitely interesting revisiting it as an adult and like thinking about the ideas behind it, which is the whole reason they assign it, is they want you to think about the ideas behind it. It kind of like teaches you a lesson about books having bigger meaning than they seem to on the surface. Right. And so in that sense, I think it's a good book for that. But, that's definitely something that I'm engaging with like from the jump here now, and affects my reading of it a little bit. But yeah, I'm curious for you, man. When did you first read this book, and what was it like reading it as an adult? And
just to address for people watching, Luke is renovating his space right now, so it's a little different.
Yeah, if you can see me on YouTube, there's kind of blank behind me and stuff because I've moved my office around, and the decorations are not up yet. They'll be coming.
All right. So I read it in school. I can't remember if it must have been in middle school or maybe early in high school. And I remember it being really profound. I remember being like really engaged by it and being like, wow, like it is, man is inherently violent. And it seems like the history is just always showing that. And then my read this time is a little different. And I actually thought going into that I was going to be like, oh, this is this literature classic that, I've read before and I'm reading again, and it's going to take me on this journey. And it does to an extent, and this is probably why you read it when you're younger. It's more on the nose than I remember, more like pessimistic in such a major way.
Yeah. Some might call it cynical.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely, sort of trotting into that territory. And I don't know, I just found myself kind of being like, ooh, this is less fun. And especially with like, the state of the world and looking at like, veiled sort of, regimes being pitted against each other here with these these groups of kids, the way that they branch off together, and like, what they're, I think, at least in my read,
political ideologies perhaps that come about and go against each other.
What they're representing as far as like those types of people, like there's like intellectuals, there's more authoritarian seeming regimes, democratic, and there's so I don't know, it was like less fun than I was expecting, but I do still, I guess, appreciate it for some of the, like, especially for when I read it, like some of that graphic imagery and like how far it goes for a book that I read that young. The pig head always stuck with me, and that was like such an iconic image to the story. Yeah. And
we should say we are going to spoil some details about this book. We feel like it's like a literature classic at this point. So if you're worried about spoilers, that's not really what this is about anyway. Obviously, there's a lot you're going to get from this book reading it that even us spoiling the plot isn't going to necessarily take away from. So we're going to kind of be a little more loose with spoilers than we typically are.
Yeah, so just to wrap up my thoughts, I felt like I could see more of what Golding was doing than I did when I was younger. And in that sense, I felt like he was really putting his finger on the scale of like, him sort of saying universal truths about the world and humankind.
So it didn't help. Like, I don't know about you, but I also listened to the audiobook, and he's the one who reads it. And he starts things off with like a little reflection on writing the book and like what he meant by it. And then he even ends the book with like a reflection on like what his takeaways are. And that definitely puts your finger on the thumb. You have the author like telling you, this is what I meant by it. even though I found it interesting to hear that, I have mixed feelings about it being a part of the official audiobook. Because even though he does say, like, ultimately I want your takeaway to be whatever it is you took away from it, he also just, like, provided you with a takeaway that he wants you to have as well. And, like, that makes the book a little less interpretive to me. So that's just, like, a nitpick. As much as I found it was interesting, I don't know how I feel about being, like, a piece of the official audiobook.
Maybe it's just, like, for those kids that don't want to read the book and they want to get, like, a spark notes from the author right up top.
Yeah.
Like, what is this about? Boom. You know, I guess the internet is a thing these days.
Yeah,
so
I mean, there's lots of ways to get that
it.
influence.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to be that for some kids, probably. Keep that in mind.
Yeah. Read the book, kids. Just read it. Just do the work.
Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting to think about this book, and I think you're right, because my memory of reading this the first time was I thought it was really fun. It is something, I think it's called like a Robin-esque in the sense that it's referencing Robinson Crusoe. So any novel or story that's about a character or characters who are experiencing some sort of isolation and survival situation would be considered a Robinson-esque, I guess. And so in that sense, that's what's going on with this book, right? So like The Martian would be an example of that.
Stranded.
Castaway, you know, like a lot of these, any of these kind of stories where someone's stranded and they're, you know, maybe it's a different kind of environment than they're used to and they're having to survive. And then, you know, you have like obviously stories where it's just one person, but then you have stories where it's a group of them. And then you have to figure out, you know, society. And like the show Lost comes to mind. Like there's a lot of influence of these kinds of stories over the years. And this is one of the most iconic ones because it deals with the idea of like setting up a structure for how to, you know, govern this new space. And you're doing it through the lens of adolescent boys, specifically adolescent British boys. Which we can get into. But it's also something that I heard described as a novel of ideas. This is an interesting term. So this applies to any novel that is about its ideas more than it is about the story itself, which is kind of a squishy categorization. But examples of this would be like Fahrenheit 451, which we've covered on this podcast. Something like Atlas Shrugged, Animal Farm,
which we could end up covering.
Which we could end up doing.
Yeah.
Maybe 1984. I'm not as sure about that one, but like, so like these stories are about their ideas primarily, and the story is sort of a vehicle to convey the ideas that the author wants to convey. And I think that's definitely the case here because William Golding had a very distinct worldview. He was a teacher of philosophy at one point in his life, and he wanted to get through with this worldview he had about, the rule of law versus, you know, what he calls savagery, good versus evil, the inherent, you know, evil in all people's hearts, that kind of thing. And this is all stuff he's exploring through this novel. When I was younger, I was able to read this book as just a story about some kids who were stranded on an island. I had no idea what it was about, you know, and I'm just like going in blind and I'm like, oh, cool. You know, this is a fun scenario to imagine. And then it gets dark and there's a talking, rotting head. One kid gets like brutally murdered, you know, like crazy stuff starts happening. And, you know, teenage Luke loved it. I was like definitely into like dark fiction and like I was starting to watch like darker movies and getting into horror and that kind of stuff. So like I remember really liking this book when we read it, just because it wasn't boring, you know, like so often I just hated like don't assign me something that I'm going to be bored by. And I found this book really interesting and engaging to read. The rotting pig head that talks to one of the boys was like an image that would always stick with me. But as you were touching on, I feel like as an adult now, knowing so much about the sort of cultural legacy of this story, and that it is quite obviously wearing it on its sleeve, that this is an allegory about us, about society, about the nature of humanity and the human heart and all this stuff. And like, rather than being a young person who is like open to a lot of ideas and like curious about, okay, what is this going to say about humans? And what is this going to say about society? I'm still open to it, but like I have opinions now that are more entrenched. And so I found myself at times arguing with the book or like, going, okay, you're making a specific point by having this happen. And, you know, people have talked about whether or not this is realistic in any way. There's even been like a real world scenario where a group of boys were stranded. I think this was like 10 years or 15 years after this got published, and it became like a well-known example. And like this very much did not happen. They like developed like a fairly functional society with like farming and like a shelter and like a sports, like they had like a makeshift racquetball club they had set up or something, and like all this stuff. And like
Nice.
they were discovered like months later, and they had this like functioning little society they had created and stuff. And it was like, oh, this is the anti-Lord of the Flies in real life. So like whether or not this is like really what would happen, I think is an interesting debate. So maybe depends on, you know, who the boys are. Yeah, I guess all that is to say that like a bit of the like magic of the story just working on me as a story and then me unpacking the ideas behind it is a bit lost on me now. I just feel like that's maybe like the first time you read it. If you can go in without knowing what it is, you'll maybe have a bit more of a pure experience with that. Whereas like rereading it now, I'm just never going to have that experience again. Now I go in knowing that it's making basically a political argument, a philosophical argument at the very least. Or at least it's asking a lot of philosophical questions. Now, I do think I was able to get deeper on them because of that.
Yeah,
like I was able to like
sure.
think about them more closely and more deeply, which is rewarding in a different way.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I still think that there's merit to reading this. I found that I don't align with a lot of like what the book was sort of saying as truths, but I like the idea of like reading something that's like maybe a little counter to what you believe and seeing how that strikes you and just challenging you in that way.
Yeah.
So you know, for that sake, it was cool to read. Also, you know, you were talking about like how realistic this is. I found myself thinking like, what if this happened with a group of adults? And like, is this like making a statement about
That's
like
Lost.
the impressionability?
There'd be a smoke monster.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, hey, there's almost like is there a smoke monster in this?
Maybe it was just inside of them all along.
Yeah, the smoke monster was in our hearts all along.
Yeah, but that idea of like, is it like making a statement about like impressionable young men? I think this is a different story if this is a group of boys that like somehow were stranded in the jungle or on an island at birth or whatever, and they or like at an age where they could just barely fend for themselves, and they hadn't been sort of like influenced by society and culture.
You're saying like they come from our society and are placed here. Yeah.
So they've already kind of built up some misguided maybe looks at the world, and they're trying to interpret that as like adolescence and trying to say like, what would the adults do? You know, do things like adults would. And also like there's like a war that's going on, and so they've been like they're literally flying home or I think they're flying home.
It's unclear. There's reference to maybe a nuclear war, and like there seems to be battles going on. There's like ships, and there's a paratrooper at one point, and like definitely implication that like the world is at war. But yeah, a lot of that stuff is vague about what exactly is going on.
And so there's some of that I think being baked in there too, is like these kids are looking at soldiers who are at war, who are maybe seeking glory or defending, or there's all these different things that they've found as important. And there's like inherent violence to war, obviously, and how like that can kind of manifest all throughout. So yeah, there's like enough there to where the thought experiment is interesting of like, if adults had the same scenario, would there be some sort of power struggle? Possibly. I mean, so many stories that we have like this have involved some sort of power struggle.
Yeah, so this kind of thing has happened in real life. Yeah.
But at the same time, I think there is like a utopia, like to your point of like a real story. I think there is a version of this where it doesn't go down that way, which kind of refutes everything that the book is trying to say, in that like you're inherently going to be violent and things will spiral out and like, you know, the pessimistic sort of messaging that's there.
Yeah. And then people have also, you know, rightfully pointed out that William Golding has a book that is only boys. There are no women present. So the idea that this is somehow representative of society is inherently flawed.
Well, it's interesting. Maybe
when, like,
masculinity.
every other society that exists on in the world is going to have women present. But yeah, it makes it more of an exploration of masculinity. That becomes like heart, and that becomes the heart of this as we're going to look at it. But he also like, I mean, again, some of this is like outside of the text, kind of paratext stuff, because he's talking about it a bit before the audiobook. But he was talking about how like he wanted them to be a representation of society, and like he felt like boys, like young boys, were like the best at like being a representation of society. And I'm like, this feels flawed inherently, man. Like I don't know about this, and like yeah, so like there was some assumptions that he was making that I don't know that I agree with.
It sounds like, you know, older generation sort of thought processes, I guess.
Looking at viewing men as like the default and like,
Yeah.
women as like a deviation from the default rather than just like another part of the default. Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me. And also just with the story being so British, I noticed a few times of this like nationalistic pride sort of British
English
stuff
exceptionalism. Yeah, absolutely comes. There's even characters that early on in the book are like, the English are
British.
best at everything.
Yeah,
He's like, we're English, and so we have.
So
to be
we're
going
to do the right thing.
Yeah, and it's very inherent to this idea that like we're now. I think he's actually. I don't think he's saying it because he necessarily believes this. I think he's kind of presenting it as like this is an attitude that these boys have, and it's probably not good. To be generous with him, but is there maybe a bit of this going on? He's at least like reflecting something that he sees in the people around him, I'm sure.
But then there's the part of me that sees that society dissolves away. There's this quote unquote like savage look at they're like smearing themselves with paints, and they're doing all this like stereotypical sort of like savage quote unquote thing. And we're talking about it from the lens of like an English person who with all the colonial leans that they've had and all the conquests and taking over cultures and stuff. So that feels like when I see that level of sort of nationalism, I'm like wondering if there's like maybe an unintentional usage of like, oh, when society devolves, we turn into these tribes and these people that we see as like lesser than or otherizing them in some way.
For sure, and the implications of that are troubling because it seems to be. I mean, he even says in the paratext of this, in the audiobook, he talks about how like if there's one takeaway, it's that we should have rules, and that like without rules, it's chaos, and if it's chaos, things devolve into evil. Essentially, and like who's deciding the rules? It's the British society, it's the English, it's their civilization, and their civilization is superior to quote unquote savages. And so when you bring civilization to savages, you're elevating them into society and goodness, and you're like sort of freeing them from the evil of savagery.
Right.
That is a very troubling bit of messaging here. Now, do I think that's the main message of the book? I don't think so, but it's definitely baked in here, and I didn't like it.
Yeah,
I think inherently problematic, William Golding. But he was writing in the 50s, so we can keep that in mind. And also, let's talk about the man a little bit because I think his background does influence his writing of this book. So, Sir William Golding, was born in 1911. He was a British novelist, playwright, and poet, best known for his debut novel, Lord of the Flies. So this was his debut. I don't think it was the first book he ever wrote, but it was the first one he published. He would end up publishing another 12 volumes of fiction in his lifetime. In 1980, he was awarded the Booker Prize for Rites of Passage, the first novel in what became his Sea trilogy, To the Ends of the Earth. And in 1983, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. In the results of his contribution to literature, he was knighted in 1988. He was also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and in 2008, The Times ranked Golding third on its list of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. As for the novel itself, it would be awarded places on different lists, like the Modern Library 100 Best Novels, reaching number 41 on that editor's list, and number 25 on the reader's list. In 2003, it was listed at number 70 in the BBC survey called The Big Read. And in 2005, it was chosen by Time magazine as one of the 100 best English language novels since 1923. It was also included as in the list of 100 best young adult books of all time. It's very popular in schools, especially in the English-speaking world. And it was ranked as the third favorite books from school that people would read, behind only Animal Farm and Great Expectations. So this is one that people remember fondly from their time in school. And in 2019, it was listed on the 100 most inspiring novels. Inspiring is an interesting term to use for this book, but okay.
Yeah, inspiring. Interesting.
So this is like big deal stuff. Like this is like one of the most notable books in literature. It's very remembered. It's very widely taught, widely discussed. And he had this other stuff in his career that he would write, but this is the one he's most known for, and it's interesting to note that it was his debut. So yeah, he was a teacher. He would teach English, he would teach philosophy and Greek and drama, all in the late 30s and 40s. And then in December 18th of 1940, he reported for duty to the HMS Raleigh for World War II.
Wow.
So his military service was very impactful on his life. During World War II, he joined the Royal Navy. He served on a destroyer, which was briefly involved in the pursuit and sinking of the German battleship the Bismarck. Additionally, he participated in the invasion of Normandy on D-Day, commanding a landing craft that fired salvos of rockets onto the beaches. He was also in action at the Walcheren in October and November of 1944, during which time 10 out of 27 assault crafts that went into the attack were sunk. So he was on one of the 17 that didn't get sunk, and he rose to the rank of lieutenant. So he fought at a lot of big, notable battles in World War II, and this would affect him, understandably, in his later life. And here's a quote he had about this that I think is pertinent to this book. "Before the Second World War, I believed in the perfectibility of the social man, that a correct structure of society would produce goodwill, and that therefore you could remove all social ills by a reorganization of society. But after the war, I did not, because I was unable to. I had discovered what one man could do to another. I must say that anyone who moved through those years without understanding that man produces evil as a bee produces honey must have been blind or wrong in the head." His time in the war influenced his belief in there being a sort of innate evil that lurks in the hearts of men. And I would say that it's definitely a pretty cynical take, and one that I think does lie at the heart of this book, or at the very least, it's an idea he's sort of presenting and challenging, although you could even say within the novel, like the existence of our protagonists and their fighting against it implies that there's something more to this and something else going on too. But yeah, I mean, like you can understand like where a worldview like that will come from if this was the kind of stuff you were faced with.
Absolutely. I mean, just the PTSD and the way that you have to see the enemy as different than you, and like the motivations and all of that. And the horrors that you would see.
Just what
how could you not be changed?
People were doing to each other.
Yeah. But also
and what you were forced to do.
Yeah.
Versus this war. Yeah.
Like you said, the protagonist sort of being a foil to, it's presented as like there is evil in all of us. And I kind of agree with that. I think there's the potential for evil in everybody. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I can get on board with. It's just that this is basically saying that like the default, or like when things sort of start to collapse, that there will be no good-natured people looking out for each other anymore. And like, I just kind of don't believe that, but I can understand how going through something like this would have you believe that, there's just so much. And again, there's so much like tragedy and just like, just horrific stuff that happens in the world that is allowed to happen in the world due to, greed and so many other emotions.
There's schools of philosophical thought around this. I mean, like, come to mind. I mean, I wish I had a better mind for like remembering the names of everything. I just know there's one that's that believes in sort of the inherent goodness of man, like that all people are inherently good. There's corruption of society that brings about evil. There's oppression, there's racism, there's like things that persecution, poverty, like things like that is what brings about evil, and that if you were to eliminate all of that, good would prevail, everybody would be inherently good. Then there's an opposing view that people are inherently evil, and it is through social construct that we contain it, that we control it, and that we push people into goodness. That's like a social construct. Goodness is actually a social contract, and then the base state is sort of evil. Yeah. And then obviously there's got to be some like in between areas, right? Or like that challenge the idea of good and evil as these like sort of polar opposite like things that you can attribute to people. But I think this book definitely more closely aligns with the idea of an inherent evilness or an inherent, chaos and quote unquote savagery that lies in the hearts of all of us.
Well, and like nature, people talk about just like how brutal nature is in general. Like we see it all the time, and how like, as far back as humans go, like, killing something to continue surviving, and like what that builds into you, in terms of, your need to survive and all that kind of stuff. And there's like a fear, I think, that is sort of common to see when talking about these things as well, of like, yeah, in a utopia, when everything's going well, maybe everybody can be inherently good. But then, like you said, you introduce like some level of greed or superiority complexes or whatever that looks like, that pushes everything. And then there's this sort of back and forth.
Is it possible for humans to exist in that state?
I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, as you said. Like, I don't think it's this person's a good person, this person's a bad person, and you're born that way or you develop that way. It's all very nuanced.
It's often called the problem of evil as a philosophical discussion point. And like, why does evil exist? What is it? Is it something inherent? Is it something taught you can eliminate in some way? Also, like, why does it seem fairly unique to people? Like, we see a lot of survival of the fittest type situations, right? Like, that's very obvious that we see that in nature. But it's hard to classify things as evil. You know, when an animal kills another to survive because it needs food, like, you don't think of that animal as behaving evilly. Right? And so, like, it's definitely like a human construct. But also, it's like one of some of the only people that we see like cruelty play out in that way. Now, I haven't done like extensive research. Maybe there has been studies of this, and maybe there are other animals that demonstrate cruelty in some way for seemingly no gain. But like, we have noticed that this is a thing that humans do.
Yeah, I do know that like intelligence, like I know orcas will like attack sharks.
Oh yeah,
just to attack them, and because just for fun almost. So it's like,
maybe there are some examples of it. Yeah, is that evil? I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know if I think there's like a cruelty to it, a brutality to it. I don't really know.
Yeah. So maybe I'm not even accurate in saying that it's unique to humans, but I've heard that said. I'm sure it depends on how you define it. But like much of philosophy, sometimes it gets into like defining terms, discussion about, an argument about defining terms.
I think more often than not, it is humans, though. Like, we see it more, especially more frequently, I would say, than you would see it in the animal kingdom, even.
Yeah. So these are all topics that he's dealing with as he writes this book. I think a couple other notes I'll give that I saw. So September 1953, after his service, he tried to get this book published and got rejected from 7 other publishers. Golding sent the manuscript to Faber and Faber. And it was initially rejected then as well by their leader, Jan Perkins, who labeled it as, quote, rubbish and dull, pointless. Pretty harsh.
Okay.
However, it was eventually championed by Charles Monteith, a new editor at the firm. And Monteith would ask for him to make some changes to the novel. And it would later be published as Lord of the Flies. That was not its original name. He said that he got the idea from the Coral Island, which is referenced a couple times in this book. This was like a famous book at the time. 3 British school children are stranded on an island, and they end up like forming a righteous group that like fights off pirates and fights off quote unquote savages, and like through their basically good Christian values establishes like a new society. And this was a very popular book at the time. And he was sort of reading that and had the response, and he talked to his wife about it and was like, he'd had this experience teaching, and then he'd had his experience in the war. And so he was like, what if I were to write a version where children would, quote, were on an island and they would behave in the way children really would behave? And she was like, yeah, that's a good idea. You should do that. And so that's what he did. And so that was interesting, too, because you look at that, that's what he's claiming he's doing, is he's trying to write a book about the way children would really behave. Which, again, there's a lot of like questions about whether or not that's true. But in his perception, that was the case. When the book was originally being shopped around, it was called Strangers from Within. But it would eventually be renamed The Lord of the Flies, which is, Beelzebub. It's like another name for. So it more directly sort of like takes it into a place of, we're talking about the nature of good and evil when you use a name like that.
Right.
And in those edits, it was said that he removed an entire section that described the evacuation from nuclear war. So basically the whole setup of like these boys evacuating, I guess, plane crashing. I'm not even clear. Did they crash a plane? I don't know. It's kind of unclear. There's talk about a scar.
I thought it was like shot. Yeah, I thought it was like shot down.
Something, right? But then it doesn't seem like they're like injured or anything. So I don't know how they're all like seemingly fine.
But none of the adults made it. Like, they talk about
Yeah,
that
that's
early
true.
on. They're like, no, yeah.
Yeah, so seemingly they're all okay somehow. But and there's a talk about a scar, which it sounded like a crash site maybe on the island. So that's the implication. But again, this is all left vague, and apparently there was a big section where this was written about, and he just cut it all. And started with them just basically already being on the island and left a lot of this kind of stuff vague, which is an interesting choice. Like, that's a bold choice to make, and I think this book, weirdly, probably wouldn't be as iconic as it is if you had some of that stuff. Because in some ways it distracts from the main point of this book, which is being a novel of ideas, like I talked about. Like, that isn't that important to getting to the ideas of the book, which really only begin once we're on the island.
Yeah, I think that's true. And like the ambiguity, I think, is appreciated. Plus, it makes for a shorter novel, and it's maybe more approachable in that way.
Apparently, there was also a mysterious figure that the boys would interact with that was implied to maybe be some sort of god. Now, it's interesting because they do still interact with the Lord of the Flies,
Yeah.
But there was apparently like some other figure as well. In the earlier draft.
Was it made of smoke?
I don't know. Maybe.
And was there a hatch on the island?
Yeah. He was recounting certain numbers. But yeah, anyway, that was all cut. It is funny how much that does sound kind of like Lost, though. When we start getting into like metaphysics and gods and stuff too, it's like there was some of that, wasn't there? Eventually, he would say that he just accepted the edits, and he said, I've lost any kind of objectivity I ever had over this novel, and I can hardly bear to look at it anymore, which is, like, legit. Like, I get that. And you can view the edited manuscripts, apparently. They're still available at the University of Exeter Library. So if anybody's curious about that. So anyway, that's, like, sort of the history of him writing this book. He would die when he was 81 from heart failure. Kind of came about suddenly and unexpectedly. But yeah, he's a very renowned author, mostly for this book, but had a career. He did struggle with alcoholism. I remember reading that, something he struggled with throughout his life.
Yeah.
It seemed like he would have bouts of it, like really coming back, and then like maybe periods of sobriety as well. So that was something that also affected his career. But yeah, I mean, he clearly struggled with some of the demons of his own. All right, man. So if you're ready, we can move into the plot here and start talking about this thing specifically.
Yeah, let's do it, yeah.
Okay. So in the midst of a wartime evacuation, a British airplane crashes on an isolated island. The only survivors are boys in their middle childhood or pre-adolescence. A fair-haired boy named Ralph and a fat boy named Piggy, or nicknamed Piggy, find a conch shell, which Ralph uses as a horn to gather survivors. Ralph immediately commands authority over the other surviving boys using the conch, and is elected their chief. He establishes 3 goals for the boys: to have fun, to survive, and to constantly maintain a smoke signal that could alert passing ships. Ralph, a red-haired boy named Jack, and a quiet boy named Simon use Piggy's glasses to create a signal fire. The semblance of order amongst them deteriorates as the boys grow lazy and ignore Ralph's efforts to improve life on the island. They become paranoid about an imaginary monster called the Beast. Ralph fails to convince the boys that no beast exists, while Jack gains popularity by declaring that he will personally hunt and kill the monster. At one point, Jack takes the boys to hunt a wild pig, including the boys who were meant to watch the signal fire. The smoke signal goes out, failing to attract a ship that was passing by the island. Ralph angrily confronts Jack and considers relinquishing his role as leader, but is persuaded not to do so by Piggy. Thoughts on our main characters? Thoughts on this little society that starts to form?
Yeah, I thought Ralph is an interesting character almost right away because I just get politician vibes, like someone who's like good looking, that has natural leadership qualities that people want to follow.
But it's also a dick.
Can talk a little.
Like, I also don't like Ralph at all.
But I feel like politicians can be like that
for
as well.
sure. Yeah. Because like that's one thing is like I didn't find I liked any of these kids. Like they're all pretty. I mean, like Piggy maybe. Like I always felt like I always felt a closer bond to Piggy than anybody else.
Yeah,
but
voice of reason for sure throughout, and it's like not taken seriously. Like it's like not, again, a natural leader, conventionally attractive, like all those reasons. Does that mean that he's not listened to as often as some of these other people?
Yeah, well, it's fucked up because early on, Piggy, which is the only name he's given in the novel, but he tells him, he's like, they used to call me Piggy, but I don't want anyone to call me that. Which, like, if you don't want someone to call you something, don't tell anybody, man. But he makes the mistake of telling Ralph, and then Ralph immediately calls him it. And he's like, that's who he is. And then like later on when he tries to confront him, he's like, I told you not to tell anybody that. And he's like, well, it's better than calling you fatty. And he's like, all right, I guess we'll go with Piggy.
He does seem like he like once he realizes how much it's hurting Piggy, he does regret it, but at that point it's too little too late, and it's like, you know, consequences to your actions kind of thing. Like, but this character is thrust into this leadership position and honestly has a lot of good ideas. Is like, all right, let's set up this fire, let's try to make sure we have shelter, let's set up some sort of situation, because at first it's like paradise, like they're all having a great time, there's fruit everywhere,
no grown-ups around, we can do whatever we want.
They're all having a ball. And then it's interesting how quickly this, like, he puts Jack into a position of power by saying you get to be a hunter, and that how quickly that becomes an identity and like
it's Jack and these like choir boys that he's like buddies with, and he almost wins the very initial election. The election is also so based on nothing. Like Ralph's like claim to fame is like, I found the conch shell.
Yeah,
and, like,
I blew the conch. Yeah,
he's like, I blew it. So, which is so interesting. I'm pronouncing it conch because that's how William Golding pronounces it in the audiobook. Yeah, but I've also always heard conch. So I don't know if is that an English versus British thing or what? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it could be. I've always said conch.
I feel like I've always said conch too, but I was doing conch because that's what he says in the audiobook. Anyway, so whatever it is, it's the shell.
Someone will write in to tell us. Yeah, I do want to talk about the conch too, because it's like so much significance was given to these certain tools. Yeah. Like here, the conch is like, if you're holding it, you get to talk.
Yeah. I'm holding it, therefore I'm the only one who can talk. Yeah.
And also just the way that it brings them all together initially, even like it pulls everyone out of the woods to it, and like there's like a sense of like I don't know, communication there of like something that's like kind of universal. And then same thing with Piggy's glasses, the spectacles, of like how powerful that tool is. And like you think about like
symbols, you've touched on two very important ones. One's the conch and one is the glasses for sure.
Right. And the glasses too, you think about like, you know, man, you know, discovering fire and how important that is like a stage in the evolution of man, and how that is such a powerful device, and what it represents too, of like fire is so destructive, and yet it like also signals to other boats and stuff coming by with the smoke and the idea that they could get rescued because of it. And that just like, so that seems like such an important thing right away. It's also like of their past life, like it's like a technology from where they're coming from. And I always thought that those are interesting things to dig into with those specific items. Yeah,
you know, I think I can add a little bit to that. Like, so for the conch, it is a method of communication. It's literally a sound that draws people together, and then like it becomes the thing that allows you to speak. It becomes the thing that allows you to be heard, and it shows a little bit of like inherent sort of absurdity to that, of like, why is this one thing the thing, but also like because we all agree it's the thing, like it's like the nature of rules and law, and like if we all agree this is the way things are, then we should hold ourselves to it. But then also that immediately starts being challenged about whether or not there should be any power to the conch.
Well, it's like social constructs like money, right? It's like we give it so much power, and it's this thing that we've created that is like a device of value, and that's all it is. It doesn't mean anything on its own.
But in some ways, it's also like the guy with the biggest horn is the guy who gets to be the leader. Like, why is that? That seems weird. But anyway, and then the glasses are a really interesting one, because to me, like, not like I always liked Piggy, because I also was an overweight child, so I think I identified with him in that way. But he's also, I think, the voice of reason. Often he's the voice of like rationality. He's like the one who sort of wants people to be calm, to like think about things smartly, to do things a systematic way. And his glasses are literally the thing that enables them to create fire. And fire is the thing that sort of is able to keep them alive, right? So his rationality is like, if his glasses represent him, and in some ways they do, they become powerful forces in this society that starts to be created, and then like we'll get to it, but like the next thing that happens is like one of the lenses breaks in his glasses, and things are starting to go astray, and now all of a sudden he cannot really see super well, so he as the voice of reason is also starting to lose his grasp on the situation, his power, his ability to see it, perceive it. And then the thing that he's using and that represents him is also starting to deteriorate as well. So
well, and it's taken from him in many ways.
It's stolen
too,
from
so
him
like,
at one point. This symbol continues to play out as we go. Anything else here at the beginning? I mean, I think Jack is funny because Jack is a character in Lost, and this is a very different Jack, because Jack in Lost is like, he's very rational, I feel like, and he's like a doctor, and this Jack is the opposite. He's like, he's a hunter. He's like a very emotion based. He's the guy who leads the quote unquote savages later.
Well, it is not lost on me that they start out as like the choir, and then they become hunters, and how that's the juxtaposition there, and how they are, like I said, he gets this position of power, and then that power corrupts him in this way that like he realizes the power dynamic is such that he's bringing meat, which I was thinking about this too. I think I forget where I heard this, but someone correct me if I'm wrong, but in like hunter-gatherer societies, apparently like gathering was so much more what people would survive off of, like in terms of like quantity of food.
Makes sense.
Versus
it's hard to rely on like, hunting.
And like the hunting, would be very nutritious and sustaining and everything like that, but only for shorter periods of time, whereas the gathering was constant.
And you had to be able to survive if for whatever reason you weren't able to hunt anything.
Right. And so like it's interesting to me that like they have all these fruit available to them, and then eventually like so much is fixated on this meat and like the actual aspect of the hunting and everything like that.
Yeah. And people have pointed out that the only female character in this book is actually the pig. And when they kill the pig, it's actually quite brutal and kind of weirdly sexual. And it
did seem like that.
Also doesn't help with some of the accusations that were leveled, that have been leveled at William Golding for being a bit misogynistic, perhaps. So Jack is like, he's the emotional one. He's the one who is the hunter. And he hears from, I think it's Simon, who is this like, he's almost the like spiritual one who's maybe like a little more paranoid. He's, I think, the one who first talks about the beastie. And he describes it as almost like a snake, which is very biblical. So I've heard that there are also references to Shakespeare's play The Tempest, which I haven't read. But apparently there's some of that in here, biblical references, and like I could definitely see the snake, kind of demon, kind of devil, and like whether or not there's an interesting debate about the externalization versus internalization, because I like that Golding is like kind of showing us a situation where the only real threat to these boys' survival is themselves, and there is no beastie. It doesn't seem like, at least that's my read of it, but it is very useful for Jack to say, there is one, and I'm going to hunt it, and I will protect you from it. And that becomes his like path to control, and that is definitely saying something about like strongmen, authoritarian figures, right?
I mean, immediately, like World War II, Hitler, the Jews are whatever was able to convince Germany that the Jews were the evil ones.
Yeah, they're the evil ones, and I'm going to protect you from them. Yeah, so that's interesting. I think that's a well drawn allegory there.
Yeah, and this idea of there being a sort of almost self-fulfilling prophecy of like, him seeing the beastie, and he's the first one. I think he realizes, and it's almost said in the text where it's like, maybe this is actually just like a manifestation of the evil that's in all of us, and then the Lord of the Flies says to him at one point, like, you're not going to make it.
Well, let's get to that part, because that's next here, where we can talk about who the Lord of the Flies is. I'll just go ahead and read the next bit of plot. So one night, an air battle occurs over the island, and the body of a fighter pilot drifts down in a parachute. Twin boys Sam and Eric mistake the corpse for the beast. When Ralph and Jack investigate with another boy, Roger, they flee in terror, believing that the imaginary beast is real. Jack tries to turn the others against Ralph and goes off alone to form his own tribe, and most of the other boys gradually join him. Jack and his followers set up an offering to the beast in the forest, a pig's head mounted on a sharpened stick and swarming with flies. Simon, who often ventures into the forest alone, has an imaginary dialogue with the head that he dubs the Lord of the Flies. The head tells Simon that there is no beast on the island and implies that the beast is actually within the boys themselves, and predicts that the others will turn on Simon. That night, Ralph and Piggy visit Jack's tribe, who have begun painting their faces and engaging in primitive ritual dances. When Simon realizes that the beast is only a dead pilot, he rushes to tell Jack's tribe, but the frenzied boys, including Ralph and Piggy, mistake Simon for the beast and kill him. So this is like a really crazy kind of surreal part of this book. And this is the stuff that like captivated me as a kid. Like I thought this was so cool. Very, very interesting, and it's a very memorable part. Yeah, so first off, you have the hallucination, maybe, of this talking, rotting pig head. But then I always loved the vision of this body carried down by a parachute, and the way it's described, where it's like leaning over, and then because of the parachute, catches the wind, and the cords are all attached to it, and he's like kind of wrapped up in the cords. It like moves his body around from just like the way the wind is affecting it, and that makes them think it's alive. And I always thought this was such a cool device in this story because it convinces them that the beast is real, but also like to me, and especially this time reading it, it is such a tie to the sins of the existing society, like you were talking about. Like this is like they cannot be free of what has come before. This is a literal corpse that is wrapped in that is only here because of war, and it comes down and is literally just like being puppeted by like just the vagaries of the environment, but it is being puppeted in such a way to terrify them and to convince them that there is a beast that they need to be worried about and afraid of, even though it's not. It's like seems to be empty. The one who perceives it as empty is Simon, who ends up being killed. Yeah. So like there's some interesting stuff being said here. Right,
and like how war is almost always fought because of fear, like the fear of the fear of possible attacks, like preemptive, all this other stuff like that tends to happen so often.
Well, and it's also like figments of your own imagination too. It's you seeing shadows, it's you seeing things that aren't there.
Yeah, I love it being a specter though, like you said, like a specter of fear that the kids, like whether you want to think of it as like physically there manifested on the island, or the specter of war and conflict and everything that goes on in the world that they're going to have to deal with as they grow up. Like, yeah, it is powerful in that way.
Yeah.
And then, the vision and where that leads Simon as a character, in the way that like there's an inevitability to this character dying, and I think you latch onto that and the fear of that. And you see like all the other kids get caught up in this frenzy, and and
it's so interesting because the way they justify the frenzy to themselves is around the fear of the other. It's fear of the beastie, and we have to do this to. At first, it's like we have to do this to appease and to protect ourselves against the wrath of the beast, and then it's like we're actually fighting the beast off in this moment. And like somehow in this surreal, like frenzied way, they seem to not realize that the person they are attacking or the thing they are attacking is not a beast and is instead one of their own. It's kind of a like hard to believe moment, but also like I think he's trying to imply there is like this kind of blood frenzy on them, and that they all get caught up in it. And it is really interesting to me that Ralph and Piggy are a part of this,
right,
and not absent, because it would have been very easy to say this is just Jack and his group, they've gone crazy. But the fact that Ralph and Piggy are there and participate in it,
again, it's like that idea of like justified fear, like pushes you to the point where you feel like this is the only thing you can do to protect yourself, your families, all this other stuff. Like this is the war that they're going into, right. And no one's hands are clean in war. Like if you participate, like it just that just is a part of it.
Because ultimately, it's the ideas behind this that make it so powerful. Not as much like whether or not you believe this is what would really happen. What Golding is trying to convey here is, like the enemy is actually just you. You don't even recognize it. You've othered them, or you've created in them this monster, but you don't realize that they're actually more like you than they aren't. And then also, yeah, the fact that it does stain the hands of our characters who we kind of at this point perceive as our protagonists, even though, again, like Ralph and Jack kind of bond over bullying the shit out of Piggy early on. So like that is always been an interesting dynamic to me of like, these guys are both terrible. I don't know why you like either of them, but
yeah,
they do. And you know, obviously like Ralph seems to be like more interested in like a society and like, you know, keeping the signal fire up, which by the way, we talked about the signal fire. That's an interesting symbol in and of itself too, because that is like literally a sign and a signal that we want to be rescued. We want to return to the life we once had. We want a return to civilization. All of that is caught up in the idea of keeping the signal fire lit. And the other boys who don't seem to care about that anymore, you can see that like they're actually more interested in the life they have now, in this sort of savage life that they've, quote unquote, again, this term is problematic.
It's
what's
loaded,
used by the book. And that state that they're in now is what they actually want, and they don't really care about being rescued anymore. So they've lost their connection to the former world.
Well, and I can see obviously like you think of young boys trying to like stick to one task and how them being pulled away to like there's early on they're like wanting to play in the water instead and do other things but yeah, like this idea that like some characters don't want to go back and this another show. It's funny that we talk about like Lost and some of these others, but there's a show that's kind of like a Lord of the Flies but with young women, and it's
Yellow Jackets. I actually have never seen this show.
Yeah,
but I've heard lots of people like it a lot, and like this actually kind of makes me want to watch it now.
Yeah, you should watch it. Yeah,
because I know good. That's heavily influenced by this, right?
I've liked a lot of what I've seen, and it's so obvious how much that story owes to this, and how cool it is to see it inverted.
It's inverted. It's like all women, right?
Women,
or all
yeah,
girls.
it's awesome, and really well done. Like really cool show. Keeps you guessing. They do a lot of cool stuff with like the present day and then the past and the future and stuff. So it's cool.
That's one I've been wanting to watch, actually, so that's a good reminder. I also just realized, because we're talking about all these influences and all these other things, we never said that like we're covering this because there is a modern adaptation on Netflix that like just came out. I saw like an ad for it when I turned on my Netflix recently. I was like, oh, there it is.
It was out on the BBC in February, and it's come to the US on Netflix in May.
So so that's what we're going to get to. We're going to get to this modern film adaptation, which I want to return to at the end, and we can talk a little bit about like what we might expect or what we're looking for in a modern adaptation of this. But let's finish this out first. I got another bit of plot here. Jack and his tribe steal Piggy's glasses, which are the only means of starting a fire. Ralph goes to Jack's camp with Piggy, Sam, and Eric to confront Jack and retrieve the glasses. Cementing his rebellious spirit against Ralph's authority, Roger drops a boulder that kills Piggy and shatters the conch in the process. Ralph manages to escape, but Sam and Eric are forced to join Jack's tribe. That night, Ralph secretly confronts Sam and Eric, who warn him that Jack plans to hunt for him. The next morning, Jack's tribe sets fire to the forest, and Ralph narrowly escapes the boys and the fire. While fleeing, he falls down in front of a uniformed adult, a British naval officer who has landed on the island to investigate the fire. Ralph, Jack, and the remaining boys erupt into sobs over the, quote, end of innocence. The officer then expresses his disappointment at seeing the boys exhibiting such feral, warlike behavior, then turns, quote, moved and a little embarrassed, to stare at his cruiser waiting offshore. So, yeah, let's talk about everything leading up to that ending, and then we can focus a little bit on the ending. But, like, everything leading up to that, Piggy's death, shocking. This is like, I don't know, it's kind of a spoiler but everything everybody kind of knows. This is like Ned Stark for me. When I first read this, I was like, what? How can this character is the one I connected with the most? I thought for sure he was going to be the one who survived and like kind of won the day, and like no, he gets killed violently, brutally. His brains just seem to be coming out on the rocks. And like I don't even know. Roger just is like off the deep end now and fully going full the way of Jack and his group, I guess.
Yeah, that's a character we should talk about too, because I think Roger's the character that early on is like throwing rocks at like some of the young the littlins or whatever that are in the water.
The littlins, yeah. It's so funny. There's like littlins around who are like kind of like too young to just be a part of any of this. They're just like there all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they do like kind of like gravitate to one person or another too.
But they do kind of play an interesting role of like that idea of like if these are grown-ups in society and they're whatever going to war or having these like political vyings within the group, there's also these innocents.
Yeah.
These kids seem
they're kind of
innocent.
like they become kind of a proxy for like just your standard civilian who's not in leadership. Like they're just the little ends that we're either protecting or we're managing or
Roger's throwing rocks at them,
or somebody's throwing rocks at them, or we have to like get their vote, or we get their support.
This, I think, is a reference to this kind of character that's like inherently kind of curious to the point of cruelty, where we hear about like, people who torture animals and that kind of like a sort of psychopathic tendencies, that kind of thing, where you're seeing someone test the boundaries because there's no longer these like social constructs in place. So he's throwing rocks at these kids. He's like, I'm not going to hit the kid, but get it close, and then kind of hides away.
He's like
and then
originally more on Ralph's side, isn't he? He's like one of the turncoats. And then he just throws in fully with Jack eventually. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it seems like a descent into it a little more. Like but he kind of maybe always had that in him, where he wanted to, he was interested in the violence in a weird way.
Maybe we all have it in us, William Golding would probably say. Although, I don't know, Ralph kind of holds back. Although, again, he also participates in the murder of Simon. So that's maybe the sign that he is also not without blood on his hands, literally.
Yeah. It's also like a group thing, right? Which we haven't talked about, where it's like a lot of characters like on their own tend to act a certain way. And then there's that sort of like mob where they come together and they get caught up in each other's actions, and they kind of like egg each other along and do things more intensely and I don't know if that's like a commentary on like group mentality, like mob mentality, or if it's a commentary on like young boys of like kind of pushing the envelope and trying to impress each other or something. Or
I think he's absolutely touching on that. And like the World War II is just like such an example of the I was just following orders defense, right? And that's like this idea of like and there's been psychological experiments about this, like you got your Stanford prison experiment, or like the Milford experiment, where they're administering the shocks because an authority figure is telling them to do so. And like how far people will go, and like there is this idea of like the social constructs can also exist to perpetrate evil, which is interesting because like that also like kind of goes against his what he claims is the message of this, about how like society and rules are necessary to combat against evil. And yet that's like my counter to that is like we've seen so many times where authority figures in society, if in the wrong hands, I guess, or if allowed to formulate in such a way around fear and maybe like more negative emotions, it perpetuates itself and creates some of these situations, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the ideal has been deteriorated as time has gone on as well, of like checks and balances and watchdog organizations and all this other stuff, where pre Watergate, we're talking pre Watergate, this is a British person, so I'm putting my own sort of cultural
and we have our modern
into that.
experiences with it.
But that idea of like believing in government in that way, believing in the structure of society in that way.
Not exactly a time right now where I'm feeling too great about our government, especially, but maybe government in general, But there was a cultural revolution that happened soon after this, in the 60s, that's like upheaving a lot of that sort of, or at least like, people are starting to question and think 60s, more. All of it, just like the civil rights, everything is sort of being challenged as far as the social constructs that have been set up, and what like trusting government explicitly, and there's a lot of like challenging that goes forward. So this is a person who's writing before a lot of that happened. So there's that perspective as well. Okay, so let's talk about that very ending part then, where we have this officer, kind of a Deus Ex Machina type moment, where it's like out of the blue, this guy's just here. Yeah. Now they explain it by saying he saw the fire.
Yeah,
but like they're basically burning down the island, trying to kill Ralph. He's running for his life, and he basically just runs into this guy who's like, "Hello, little kid." And then there's this like moment where like everyone reverts to just being children now, who are almost just like playing a game, and because now it's like higher order of power person is here in this adult, who immediately sort of commands all the authority, I guess.
Yeah, and just like, I don't know if it's like a size thing or just like an experience thing or what it is, but they obviously like defer to that right away. And then I think they know they're getting back, and like I think the weight of everything they've done sort of starts to fall on them, where they're like, this was their reality, and now it's all been shattered, and they might be going back to the same way they were before, but having done a bunch of crazy shit that they maybe wouldn't have otherwise.
He's like, well, at least no one was killed, right? And then he's like, actually, 2 people were killed.
Yeah. But I think there's a couple of things that I noted. Of course, it's a military person that's coming in to save them. Seemingly, the war could be continuing. They could be pulling the kids back into that sort of war.
Does not seem like the war was over to me.
World. Yeah. And then the other thing is just that when all the kids start crying, if I was to think of these as like people who went off to war, they're all crying, dealing with their traumas, and then this soldier like turns his back on them and lets them cry on their own and doesn't comfort, doesn't do anything, just turns the back. And I was thinking a lot
notably
about,
he's a man, so there's like some masculinity stuff going on here too, for sure.
Yeah, that idea of like them being left with the traumas of what society put them through in a way.
Well, and he turns back to the machines of war. He turns back to the destroyer, and seemingly to me in a moment of just pure irony is like thinking about how we got to get back to the destroyer, and nothing like these crazy kids who are over here fighting and deteriorating into quote unquote savagery. Time for us to get back to our machines of war and get back to the business of killing one another. So I think Golding is probably trying to show that, like, is he really any better than these kids? They're just kind of doing the same thing that society is doing. And again, this is a guy who lived through World War II, so I feel like, and this is written shortly after it. I can understand where he would have this point of view. Literally living through a time where the entire world was literally at war.
Yeah, it is just interesting to see this sort of perspective versus like a Vonnegut who also lived through some
it's like I can understand it, but also like you can definitely have different takeaways. Vonnegut's a good example of someone who had some very different takeaways.
I'm not sure that Vonnegut went through all I don't know who's to compare their sort of careers and military careers different. Or what they've been through and stuff.
Sure.
But obviously Vonnegut leans into like the absurdity.
And I think he lived through the firebombing of Dresden, like, because that's in that book.
He definitely
did.
A thing
so like he definitely went through some shit. Like, don't get me wrong. But it's different. Different shit.
But still the same war. So
same war. And different takeaways. I as far as like books go, I definitely prefer Slaughterhouse-Five to Lord of the Flies. I guess that's overall maybe where we can kind of end is like, what are your feelings on this book overall? Like, did you find that you liked it? Like, how would you kind of rate it as one of these classics of literature at this point?
I think I kind of hinted and said some of this at the beginning, but it's this book that I'm glad that I reread because I remembered it differently than I experienced it this time. I felt like it affected me more as a younger person than it does now. And the sort of morality or the morality of the book, or just like the outlook on the world of the book, or at least what is being challenged, what Golding set up, I find to be like less sort of gospel than I did maybe when I first read it. So it was a fun experience, and like I do enjoy elements of it, and it's become iconic, and I love this idea of like Yellow Jackets, like taking it and sort of like recapturing it and changing it in that way is like, it's just going to show like the continuing legacy of the story. So I do think it's important, and I do think it's cool to have people think about different schools of thought. And I think, if kids are still reading it today, I still think it's a powerful read.
Yeah. I wonder, let us know, is this still being assigned? Because it definitely widely was when I was, when we were growing up.
Yeah.
It's interesting, man. It's a book that, I think asks a lot of interesting questions, and it does it in a very accessible, profound way. And I like that about it. And I continue to find that compelling. I am less enamored with the answers that it seems to provide. And despite what William Golding maybe says about how like he wants you to just have whatever takeaway you take away from it, it does feel like he has some answers to try and provide. And a lot of those are around the stability and inherent goodness, perhaps, of society and civilization and rules, the rule of law, and how that is the thing that combats against the inherent evil that lurks in the hearts of all people. And I just think that it's more complicated than that, which is like, easy to say, but like truly like that is a bit of a simplistic just look at what's going on. There's so many other factors. I don't know that I would agree that there is an inherent goodness or an inherent evil to all people. Maybe I would argue that there is both in all of us. To like focus on one or the other, I don't know how fruitful that is. Rather than just accepting the reality that both exist, and trying to figure out a way forward with that. And then like the idea that like civilization is inherently good and like should be introduced is like such a colonialist mindset, especially in the, in the mouth of a British character saying it. Because what is that, like, we don't, again, we get into definition of terms. What is civilization? Why is the tribe that are hunter-gatherers, why is that not considered a civilization of its own kind? Why is that considered savage and somehow evil? Who gets to decide that, right? Because there are many different kinds of society. And just because, we live in a certain one doesn't mean it's the best one. And in fact, you can look at all the evils that have come about. You can look at World War II as a example of the failure of a society to protect people or to be good, a good force in the world. Like, it's hard to look at World War II and claim that, even though you would say like there was an inherent evil that it was battling against, in like the Holocaust. But like German society wasn't that different than British society in some ways. There was a lot of similarities there, and they're both Western and similar forces. He even has talked about how similar forces existed in Britain as existed in Germany, and that's one of the reasons why he saw an inherent evil. Is he was like, it could have easily been in Britain if it was in Germany doing the same thing. So like, while I get that vibe, and like I am also like a fairly pessimistic person, so like I tend to gravitate towards fiction that has more of a pessimistic lens. Something about the answer to that just being like society is something that has always rubbed me a little wrong about this, especially this time through. I'm like, I don't know, that seems a little too easy. And I don't even know that William Golding really believes it. Ultimately, I find this book to be interesting. But I would not put that, like, I wouldn't put it up there with like my favorite books. Even like, novels of ideas. I guess I don't even know if I would say this is my favorite one of those, but also like, you talked about Slaughterhouse 5, which I think is a far superior novel.
I enjoyed the journey of this that we do on the podcast, but I don't know that I'll be reading this again anytime soon. So I think it's definitively kind of put a bow on the property for me for now.
Okay, so
or at least until we see the movie.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about it again when we see this movie, and I'm really curious, to talk about it a little bit. Like, what are they going to do with this inherent diametric good versus evil? Are all these messages going to be intact? Can you tell a story like that today? Would it be as impactful? How would we feel about it? I'm not sure. So I'm curious. I have a suspicion, just because we've seen a lot of these adaptations over the years. You can almost guarantee like things are going to get changed, right? Like, so there's probably going to be more characters because, again, like there's not that many, or some characters are going to have more like active roles. I'll be curious to see if the fates. Does Piggy die? Does Simon die in the same way? And just like what changes are made, because even little changes to this story, when you're dealing with these big ideas, are going to shift the messages of this story. And I feel like it's going to more closely align with whoever the creator is. And I don't know, we're going to research it next week. Whoever the creator is of this adaptation is going to all of a sudden become the messenger. And is he or whoever it is, are they trying to tell William Golding's story as it was told? Or are they trying to tell their own version of The Lord of the Flies?
Yeah. With like an updated sort of maybe lean to some of the morality. We'll see. I'm curious and I'm excited.
We'll judge it based off of how we feel about that message if it's not the same.
Yeah, so there's 4 episodes. It's a
mini-series.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward
to
it. So
that definitely feels like we're going to be expanding and adding storylines and stuff. So does it just further flesh out something that feels like it was something William Golding would have had, or is it going to feel like it's something different? Really curious to see, man.
I've heard good things, so I am excited to dive into it.
Have you? Okay. I haven't heard like anything about this until I saw the ad for it recently.
Cool.
But yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're on YouTube, make sure to like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to our channel. We'd love to have you. So that'd be a good way to support us.
And also be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of those at Ink2Film, and we're basically anywhere you can find somebody on social media.
Also, we have a Discord, which will be linked in the show notes below. We'd love to have you join our Discord. That's where you can suggest projects to us, like, hey, this is an adaptation we'd love to hear you talk about. It's also where you can interact with our community, talk about adaptation news, all kinds of things like that. We'll have dedicated spots for each project that we cover, so there will be one on Lord of the Flies. So if you want to go to there to talk about Lord of the Flies specifically, that'd be a great place to do it. So So yeah, we'd love to have you in our Discord. We do also have a Patreon, patreon.com/inktofilm, where we release monthly bonus episodes. Our most recent one is going to be on Mortal Kombat, the 1990s film. There's a wild one to talk about. And that's over on Patreon, and we'd love to have your support for as little as $2 a month. And you can also get the ability to vote on upcoming projects. That's like the best way to do that.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man, that's going to be it for William Golding's The Lord of the Flies. Now we have a mini series to watch, but yeah, this is a fun one, man. This is one that I feel like a lot of people have experience with, so hopefully people find it engaging.
Yeah, hope so.
All right, time to set the conch down for now. We'll pick it back up next week, but I guess until next time,
keep adapting.